Good evening, dear students. We meet again. Today is the fifth class, that is Thomistic philosophy. We finished four previous classes. To recall, we start with an introduction to philosophy, then a little bit of philosophical orientation towards education. Then we looked at the first philosophy of education, that was idealism. We looked at its various assumptions. Then we evaluated its strengths and weaknesses. Then last class, we spoke about naturalism and its assumptions, and then we also evaluated its strengths and weaknesses. So that will be the mode of operation for us. Today, we will be studying Thomism or Thomistic realism, and in the same vein, we will be looking at its assumptions and its strengths and weaknesses. So that's what we are going to do today. Just give me a moment to get this started on your screen. Okay, so here we are. And okay, so if you recall, the first one we were always talking about was the metaphysical assumptions, or the assumptions about reality. Metaphysics is always reality, total reality, and if you want to look at the etymology of the word, it comes from metaphysics, that is beyond physics. And physics comes from the Greek word physis, which is nature. So all of nature, or everything including and all encompassing and beyond nature, all reality beyond nature. So these are the metaphysical assumptions of Thomistic realism. So let's see what they are. First of all, Thomism came into vogue after the philosophy of the great theologian and philosopher, the philosophical theologian or theological philosopher, Thomas Aquinas, who was a Dominican priest in the 12th century. So he studied Greek philosophy, especially Aristotle, and he combined it with Christian Orthodox thinking, particularly of St. Augustine, and the entire Christian history until then. We studied a little bit about the 7 ecumenical councils and how those councils hit upon certain cognitive truths for all Christians to believe. So that was the Christian tradition, and Thomas Aquinas comes here to take all that Christian belief and Orthodox Christian assumption and combined it with Greek Orthodox, Greek thinking, and particularly Aristotle. So that's what he has done. He's combined the two and brought about a philosophy called Thomistic realism, which has got that nomenclature and terminology today. So it asserts that particular things are real rather than abstract. So if you look at the first philosophy we studied, that was idealism, there was a lot of emphasis on the spirit and things of abstract nature, of the mind, of thinking, of thought, and things like that. Thomism, actually, as we will see, I don't want to go ahead of my lecture here, but we'll see that it is somewhere departing from idealism, and it does not really go into naturalism, but comes away from naturalism. So somewhere it is taking both the philosophies of idealism as well as naturalism and evolving a new philosophy. So in that process, what it does is it asserts that particular things are real. So material things do matter in idealism, unlike in Thomism, unlike in idealism. A thing is real through its act of existing or being. So the very fact that something exists makes that thing real. So it is not a world of Maya that Shankaracharya was talking about. It is real. What you see, what you feel, what you touch, what is out there, the objective world is real. A thing has a unique nature by virtue of its essence. Its essence is really its inner nature. Every thing that is created has got a particular nature, and we will look at the different scales in which creation is ordered. So everything has got its essential nature, the essence of what it really is. The nature of a thing, its essence, is a combination of form and matter. Form and matter. These two words, keep it in mind, we will look at it presently. Form is the aspect that makes a thing intelligible to the mind. So the form aspect of a thing helps us to understand, make it intelligible, make it understandable to the mind, the form aspect. Whereas the matter aspect makes it tangible, makes it concrete, that you can empirically touch or feel or taste or smell. So both these aspects are there. The form which is appealing to the mind, and the matter which is appealing to the body or the empirical senses of the human person. So form and matter both are there in its nature. Thomistic realism overcomes the limitations of both idealism and naturalism. We shall see that very, very concretely and very specifically through our dialogue here. Basically, as I told you, Thomism stands somewhere in between idealism and naturalism. Somewhere in between. It pulls together the good things of both areas, of both philosophies, and evolves a beautiful new philosophy. Okay, Thomas Aquinas envisions a hierarchical structure to reality. Hierarchical means ordered in a top to bottom kind of system. So there is a hierarchy in nature. There is an order from bottom to top in nature. Reality is determined by the proportion of actuality and proportionality in a thing. So how much reality is present depends on how much actuality and how much proportionality is there in a thing. So actuality and proportionality, we look at those terms again. These are some of the peculiar terms of Thomism that we must be comfortable with. Let us see what they are. Actuality is the measure of reality according to something having a particular nature. So it is a measure of reality. Okay, actuality is the measure of reality. How much of reality is present, that much actual it is. Potentiality is the ability to change in certain ways. Okay, potentiality is the ability, I think here we made a mistake, it is not proportionality, it is potentiality. Potentiality is the ability to change in certain ways. So a thing has got two aspects, the actuality as well as the potentiality. We'll see what it means here. It is the intrinsic nature of a thing that establishes both what it is and what it can become. What it is its actuality. What it can become, is its potentiality. So this dynamism is there. Both things are there. There is a particular static aspect of reality, and then there is a dynamic aspect of reality, which is tending to change. So there is something which is there, which does not change, which is actually there, and then there is something that is tending to change. So both these things are there in reality. In the hierarchical structure of reality, at the very bottom are inorganic matter like minerals. Above them are plants, then animals, humans, angels, and finally on top we have God. So this is the hierarchical structure of Thomism. There is first the minerals like coal and hydrocarbons and metallic objects in nature. all the minerals in the deep cavern of nature, and then there are the plants, then from the plants the higher animals, from the animals the humans, and above the humans the angels, and finally on top of the scale is God himself. This is a typical Thomistic hierarchy of creation. All things under God are finite beings with the potential to change to reach total fulfillment. So all of us have got some potentiality and some actuality. That potentiality helps us to change in certain ways towards a certain fulfillment of our true nature. So all things that God has created are finite, and they can change according to the potentiality present in us. Only God is total actuality. He is the great I am. There is no potential necessary for God. He is I am who I am, the great I am. He is totally finished. He is complete in himself. So God is total actuality. The whole universe is purposeful and moving towards a grand destiny. This is typical of Thomism. So God has a plan and a purpose for creating us, and the entire universe, the whole cosmos, everything is moving towards God's intended plan. That's typical Thomistic realism and part of our faith as well. With the philosophical theory of actuality and potentiality, man is on the way to realizing his full potential in relation to God. So man is on the way. He's on the way to reaching his full potentiality in relation to God. Unlike Aham Brahmasmi, according to Advaita philosophy, Thomism accepts that man will never reach perfect oneness with God in this life, because man remains a sinner till he reaches eternity. That is our faith again. That is Thomistic realism, Thomistic faith. Aham Brahmasmi is a formula where Shankaracharya, once again, in Advaita philosophy, talks about I am God. This I am God. God and me are one, so I am God. That is the philosophy of Advaita, that is non-duality, Advaita, non-duality, that me and God are one. So that we do not accept in Thomism. Thomism accepts the fact that we still have got potential, and towards the end, only in the end, we will be one with God. Reality is a rationally structured system. The human person by nature is rational. Therefore, we are all capable of knowing reality. So this is very important for us to understand. There's a little bit of naturalism in it. There's a little bit of idealism in it. And both of them together says that reality is a rationally structured system. You can see Kant talking here, reality is a rationally structured system, and you can also see naturalism working here. So both these philosophies come together, and nature is rational. The human person by nature is rational. The human person is a rational being. Rational means a thinking being. A calculated, rational, the word rationality comes from the term ratio or calculation. And so the human person is a calculated person, and so he has a rational nature. Therefore, he is capable of knowing reality. Mortimer Adler, he's a great philosophical theologian of the Thomistic tradition, an American philosopher. He passed away in 2002, an American man. He has written widely about education and Thomistic philosophy. He's a great Thomistic scholar, and he says, the mind naturally supports knowledge as the earth naturally supports vegetation. So he is not talking about idealism. You see, very, very, very important. He talks about combining the idealistic philosophy with the naturalistic philosophy. He says here, the mind naturally supports knowledge as the earth naturally supports vegetation. The Thomistic philosophy holds the correspondence theory of truth. What is this correspondence theory of truth? Truth is understood if it matches with what is real. What is in your mind, if it corresponds or it matches what is obtaining outside in reality, then that is called correspondence understanding of truth. And Thomism is typical of the correspondence theory of truth. There are different intellectual powers employed to gain knowledge, such as sense perception, intuition, pure rational insight, and revelation. So there are many methods of gaining knowledge. These are some of the epistemological assumptions of Thomism. So one of these is sense perception. What is sense perception? Just as we said, the Panchendriyam last time, it has got the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the skin, and the audition. These are the sense organs, and through these sense organs, we get knowledge into the mind. There is another way, that is intuition. There, without the sense perception, you just feel. We just feel something is going to be happening in a certain way. So that is intuition. Then pure rational insight. When somebody talks about an abstract mathematical formula, for example, a plus b the whole squared. A plus b the whole squared is equal to a squared plus b squared plus 2ab. That is an abstract mathematical formula which has to be understood through rational insight. So that is another way of getting knowledge. And then there is revelation. What is revelation? Revelation. God directly reveals certain truths to us. And that is through scripture. We get convicted, we get ideas, we get knowledge through the spiritual dimension. That is the aspect. So there are four areas here. That is sense perception, intuition, pure rational insight, and revelation. The four methods of gaining knowledge. Truths delivered by reason and revelation are compatible. So whatever truths we get, according to Thomism, whatever truths we experience in the world, they are compatible. That means they go alongside the truths of revelation. There is no conflict. There is no conflict between what God says and what we are experiencing in this world. There is a certain oneness between the two. Now we come to the axiological assumptions, or the value forming, or the aesthetic dimension of student growth and development. Let us see what they are. So just as human nature seeks truth, it also reaches for goodness and beauty. This is human nature, the appeal to goodness and beauty. Just as our mind wants to know things, just as we seek the truth, we also want to be in goodness. We also reach out for beauty. Some goods are superior to others. So there are many kinds of goods. For example, suppose I want to have a chocolate in my hand, and either I can eat it myself, which will give me satisfaction, or I can do another thing. I can take this chocolate and share it with somebody else. What happens to my satisfaction? If I have a certain evolved mind, then my satisfaction will double and increase. But if I have a darkened mind, I will not do that. So there is a gradation in the kinds of goods. There are superior goods and inferior goods. Here we say that sharing nature is a superior good, and it helps to understand things better in a certain way. The role of the rational agent is to understand the hierarchical pattern of things, good and beautiful, and to align activities with them. So our goal is to understand the hierarchical nature of this goodness. So we should know what is really good. It's not just eating the chocolate ourselves. There is a certain goodness associated with sharing that chocolate. So that is a higher aspect of good. And that we must know to align our nature more and more to that kind of goodness, is what Thomism says in its axiological assumptions. A good moral action can result only when the intellect is correctly informed and the will is properly strengthened. So here is the two terminologies here, the intellect and the will. The very, very typically Thomistic philosophy, the intellect is correctly informed. You know, the mind gets information, as we know, through the senses or through other means of gaining knowledge, or whatever it is, the mind gets informed. And once the mind is informed, the will has to act according to the direction of the mind. So both of these things should work together for a good moral action to result. Two major goals of moral development are: first, training the intellect to recognize what is right, and second, strengthening the will to do it. So sometimes you may have a weak will. You may know what to do, but you will not do it. Why? Well, there may be any number of reasons. Let me give you an example. Let us look at some of our IAS officers in government. They are people who have got a lot of intellectual power. They have got all the data. They've got all the data. But do they always act? No. Because they're afraid of the politicians above them. Only when the politician says, do this, they will do. They have got all the data in their hand. So despite having all the data in their hand, they are not able to act in their wills because they are having inadequate willpower. Knowledge is there, the intellect is informed, but the will is dysfunctional. So that can also happen. Two major goals of moral development are: first, training the intellect to recognize what is right. So the intellect has to expend its energies to recognize what is right. And second, the will has to be strengthened to do it. It's very important. This is Thomistic philosophy. Axial assumptions, the father of Thomism. Jacques Maritain is a Frenchman. He is another Thomistic philosopher, a great educational scholar. He says, the inner urge to create beauty overflows from our soul to culminate as a work of art. So the art that we are capable of doing is actually coming from our inner urge. We have an urge to create something beautiful. So we do that, we create this art because we have this deep inner longing to do this. So the urge to create beauty overflows from our soul to culminate as a work of art. For example, let's take the example of a cricketer. He's dying to be a cricketer. He wants to bat for India. He wants to be a Sachin Tendulkar. So he cannot sleep in the night. He's dreaming about it. And early in the morning, he wakes up, goes to the ground and exercises. And every day, 24 hours a day, all he thinks about is becoming a good batsman. This is typically what grabs an artist. Okay? So the inner beauty to create, the inner urge to create beauty overflows from our soul and it culminates as a work of art. Beauty delights the intellect because it essentially means a certain excellence in the proportion of things to the intellect. So intellect has got a dimension in understanding beauty. And also this is very, very typically Thomistic. Now, we know that beauty appeals to our senses. Beauty appeals to our emotions and our feelings. But here in Thomism, we say that beauty appeals to the intellect. How? By good, for example, good proportions, good integrity, flawless design. These are all intellectual aspects of understanding beauty. So beauty delights the intellect because it essentially means a certain excellence in the proportion of things to the intellect. Maritain connects art to reason in excellence through proportion, integrity, and clarity, which appeal to the intellect rather than feeling alone. That's what we just said. Moral development is the consistent striving and acting upon what we know to be good to develop habits. This is typically Aristotelian. Now, you know, in Aristotle, I think it was in the book of Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle very beautifully says that a just man becomes just by doing just acts. A courageous man becomes a courageous man by doing courageous acts. Huh? A pianist or a harp player, a player who plays the harp, becomes a good harpist by playing the harp. So it says here, the moral development of the human person is the consistent striving and acting upon what we know to be good to develop habits. So by doing just acts consistently over and over again, we become just people. By doing courageous acts consistently again and again in different situations, we assume a courageous nature and they develop habits. That's what Thomism says. These habits in us are inclinations and dispositions to act and react appropriately in certain circumstances. So they come to help us out in taking decisions and helping us out to act out in the given situation. Cultivating moral dispositions leads to virtues. So we should, Thomism says, students should be taught moral dispositions like this in the Aristotelian way. And finally, it will lead to a virtuous character. Let's see the educational implications of Thomism. A Thomist sees the world as a rationally ordered system laden with value on the one hand, and the human person endowed with intellect and will, capable of sound, moral, and rational engagement on the other. So again, you see in this statement, you see the beauty of idealism and naturalism coming together. The world is rationally ordered. The world is rationally ordered. That is naturalism. And the human person is endowed with intellect and will. That is more towards idealism. So bringing these two together, the Thomist sees the world as a rationally ordered system laden with value. The world has got value, like naturalism. And the human person, endowed with intellect and will, is capable of sound, moral, and rational engagement on the other. So both these things come together and make human life a wonderful thing. Accordingly, a chief purpose of humanity is to know the nature and structure of things in our complex world. So the human person recognizes the power of his mind and recognizes the reality outside. And together, he exercises the mind to understand the complexity of the world and lives very successfully in it. So Thomism brings together idealism and naturalism in a wonderful way. Maritain says that the ultimate goal of education is to develop this essential nature as human beings. So Maritain says that this intellect, the mind and the world together, coming together and rationally understanding the world, the mind, both these dimensions working together is a worthy cause for the student to take up, for him to develop well as a student. Since he considers the intellect to be the core of the human nature, he argues that education is primarily the nurture of our mental powers. So Maritain gives an important idea here. It says the mental powers are primary and they must be developed to understand the material world. All pedagogical exercises must aim at increasing the power of the student's mind. We just said that. The goal is to teach all students so that students grasp the general principles and logical connections and thereby come to understand the structure of reality. Again, we have heard that. Marishan believes that discipline in life is as important as educational content. All discipline, however, must occur in the context of love, creativity, and proper freedom. So here we have school life, says there is importance of discipline. Students must be taught discipline, but this discipline should occur in the context of love, creativity, and proper freedom. It must not stifle things like self-expression or freedom or a free-thinking ability to carve down upon somebody and destroy his personality. No, no, no. That is not discipline. Discipline must occur in a very evolved way where the freedom of the person is respected, love is given, and creativity is allowed for the student. It is of utmost importance, Marishan argues, for reason to be able to form accurate evaluations. So very important, he gives very good importance to reason. At one level, we are talking of intellectual procedures that must be learned, and at another, the development of the will to follow judgments of reason. So it's very important for us to understand our intellectual power and the willpower. The intellect as well as the will, as we said earlier. Maritain, this is Jacques Maritain, he says, recommends showing approval and disapproval, rewarding and punishing as methods to train the will, especially when children are small. When children are small, this works very well, but not when they are older. Unfortunately, this formula does not work when they are older. For example, when a child is doing something wrong, you show disapproval. When a child is doing something right, you give it a chocolate. So you reward that child by an act of goodness. But when you do this too much when the children are grown up, then it can backfire. Students will play with you and they will take advantage of you, and it becomes a sham nature. It develops responsible adulthood in the young learner, a state where his actions flow from the inner wellspring of moral reason. So there's a beautiful inner wellspring, a fountain. There's a fountain of moral reason. When you do these things, especially as I said about the Aristotelian way of developing moral nature, it helps us to become good, sensible, mature adults. Maritain embraces the Christian doctrine of the fall of man, resulting in weakness in the intellect and the will. Just like Thomas Aquinas and all of Christian orthodoxy, Maritain says, unfortunately, there has been the fall of Adam and the fall of man, and therefore the will and the intellect are injured. And therefore, we cannot do things consistently well. We sometimes get confused, or we are not strong enough, we can't do things the right way, and that all these things happen. So Maritain recognizes that this happens. However, he says, there is enough that remains to be properly developed, educated, and strengthened with the cooperation of God's grace to realize fulfillment. Even though human nature is broken and fallen and injured, there is a way for us to come back through assistance from God, dependence on God, and to do things towards our total fulfillment. Maritain says so. That is Thomistic philosophy. Okay. Although art is generally associated with emotion and feelings, Maritain believes that reason has a role in appreciating and creation of beauty. Now, you see, there's a role, as I said, for the intellect to appreciate art, to appreciate beauty. Why? Let me give you an example. Let's look at the architects. You know, the architects, if you look at the syllabus of architecture, you will find that students have got drawing and painting and material science and so on, so forth, design and all these things they do, but they have one beautiful subject, which is appreciation of art or appreciation of architecture. Over the centuries, what has been the typical design elements used in architecture? For example, Islamic architecture, or Hindu architecture, or Buddhist architecture. What are the design elements they use, and how is it appealing as art? This is part of appreciation of architecture. So art is not only just looking, feeling, but it is also about intellectually determining and judging and evaluating. That's also got an aspect there. Whereas art has a contemplative side whereby we enjoy and appreciate what is beautiful, it also has a productive side that enables the innate drive to create and bring about beauty and to produce works of art. So there's a creative aspect. There's a creative aspect to art. Number two, there is a productive aspect to art. So there's one person who creates art for the sake of art itself. There's another person who creates a productive art so that it's also useful to society. That's another dimension of art. So this is one of the implications of Thomism and the way we understand art. Now let's evaluate strengths and weaknesses. Thomism is, you look at that image over there, on the right side there's a stone, on the left side there's another small stone. It's balanced by the orange color stone, and there's a hinge in the bottom, the triangular stone, and somewhere in between is Thomism. So you have naturalism on one end, and you have idealism on the other end, and in the middle you have Thomism. Thomism recognizes the relationship between the conceptual and the empirical. Now go back to idealism and naturalism. What is conceptual? Idealism. What is empirical? Naturalism. So Thomism recognizes the relationship between the conceptual and the empirical, the absolute and the relative. The absolute is idealism, and the relative is naturalism, whereby we are able to apply universal ethical principles to particular situations. This is more reasonable than both idealism and naturalism. A wonderful philosophy that takes into account the beautiful things in both these philosophies. Idealism and naturalism are both drawn upon to create Thomism. Maritain says that the idealist imitation of the absolute mind is hopelessly romantic, and the naturalist conformity with nature is utterly dehumanizing. Both are wrong. Too much of empiricism is not good. Too much of idealism is not good. There is an inherent dignity in being human, and the natural powers of the mind ought to be developed through education. Cultivation of the intellect and intelligent self-direction are important principles of Thomism. Okay? Then, another thing, Thomistic epistemology is more adequate than both idealism and naturalism, as it recognizes both the empirical experience and the cognition of abstract truths rather than dwelling on only one of them. So both of them are brought together. Again, we are dwelling on the same idea that there is good idealistic aspects, good naturalistic aspects are there in idealism, in Thomism. Aquinas states that most truths we know originate in sensory experience, but are finally understood conceptually. Okay, so look at the image on the right hand side. Again, I told you the Panchindriyam. Knowledge originates in sensory experience, but it is finally understood conceptually. So it connects, a beautiful way of connecting the ideal with the natural. The idealistic with the naturalistic. A beautiful way of connection. So Aquinas states that most truths we know originate in sensory experience, Panchendriyam, but we finally understood them conceptually. So we first come into contact with particular material things through the senses and later move to knowledge of general and abstract ideas about them. We first come to understand things through our senses, but then we use our mind, we conceptualize, we abstract. This is the natural order of human knowledge. Very, very important. And this is the strength of our Thomism. Thomism stresses the objective character of values, the need to develop rational perception of moral principles, and the priority of developing virtues as the core of the moral life. I told you about Aristotelian thinking. It's very important for Thomism to develop in an Aristotelian way. What is that way? Where you become a just man by doing just acts, a courageous man by doing courageous acts, a good harpist by working on the harp, and so on and so forth. A great advantage of Thomism is its solid emphasis on the universal and the particular. Okay, since eternal principles are admissible and at the same time can be applied by the individual in concrete situations, it offers the perfect system for learning and experimenting, and therefore is a great philosophy of education and development. Look at this statement. Thomism is connecting heaven and earth, in my humble opinion. For example, let me say some of the values of the gospel. Suppose you give a very difficult value of the gospel, love the enemy. It's very difficult for us to do. But if you just accept that truth of the gospel, love the enemy, and you put it into reality, and you learn it by trial and error, you will come to know that finally this truth is an absolute truth. So it helps you to experience and experiment and learn and grow and develop, and therefore it's a principle that brings together the absolute and the relative, the universal and the concrete, and then it helps you to it becomes a great philosophy of educational development. It's very, very beautiful to see Thomism working like this. Thomism's affirmation that there is an overarching purpose to the universe would imply that it has no room for genuine, this is some of the weaknesses. So critics say that significant human choice is impossible if everything operates automatically toward an end. So we have also some critics of Thomism, these are the weaknesses. Critics say, since the universe is going towards a preconceived plan, there is the freedom for the human person. This is the question they ask. But Aquinas would argue that human beings can reject the moral order of creation and take decisions that will result in changes that would otherwise not occur. So we have the freedom to say no to God. That is our great freedom. So we have a freedom to say no, and God lets us do that. So Thomism would say it's not that you don't have freedom, you can say no to God, but I don't think there will be consequences for that. Be ready for the consequences. Whatever. Okay. Okay, then another weakness of Thomism says that the school system has spawned a strong regimented philosophy. Therefore, critics argue that in order to develop the intellect, Thomists push for the calisthenic theory of learning with a tough and dominating drill master who drives in disciplined understanding. So there is the critics of Thomism say that there is a very tough disciplinarian there, and he makes you drill like the military drill master and makes you do things in a certain way and curtails your freedom and destroys your ability to express. It's called the calisthenic theory of learning. Okay, they are also accused of the spinach theory of education, echoed by Winston Churchill, who says, "It does not matter what you teach a boy, so long as he does not enjoy it." This is the critics of Thomism says what Winston Churchill has said very pithily: that teach the child what he does not enjoy. Huh? If you teach the child what he does not enjoy, he will learn what he needs to learn. And that is a difficult way of learning to accept for some of us. So critics say that this is a drill master, there is a calisthenic theory of learning, and then there is this spinach theory of education, which is all very negative force of didaction and teaching. Finally, critics say that Thomism leads to an overly intellectualized faith. However, our basic catechism teaches that God has created us to know, love, and serve Him. So knowing is an important dimension of faith. So because of its emphasis on the mind and the development of the intellect, critics say that our faith is becoming too intellectualized. It's too much on the head. And but Thomism says that we know that God has created us to, Catechism says God has created us to know, love, and serve Him. Know Him. So know Him, we have to exercise our mind. So the knowing is an important dimension of faith experience. My dear students, that's all it is for today. Today was a little shorter class. I hope you understood some of these things. In my opinion, Thomism is a very beautiful and important philosophy, and should be understood well by any educator, especially a Christian educator, because it's a very comprehensive and a beautiful theory of the philosophy of education. So I stop here. I wish you all a wonderful week ahead and hope to see you next week. God bless you all. Bye. Thank you very much.